Welcome to another broadcast of Majoring in the Majors on the Artist First Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. You can find them at artistfirst.com. Your host, Pastor S.J. Munson, is the author of two books, The Treasure of Israel and Christ Held Hostage, The Hijacking of Christianity. Find them wherever great books are sold. Now, here he is, your host, Pastor S.J. Munson.
Hi, this is S.J. Munson, and welcome to Majoring in the Majors. The issue of race has had a long and destructive path in American history. It was there from the beginning and continues to bear its ugly fruit today. But most of us are unaware that the idea of race began not only as an outgrowth of European capitalism, but as a Christian heresy, a distortion of Christianity. And here to talk about that is Mako Nagasawa. He is the founder and director of the Anastasis Center in Boston, Massachusetts, which offers online courses and guides for group and self-study on Jesus' restorative justice and healing atonement. He's also the author of Abortion Policy and Christian Social Ethics in the U.S., and Christmas with Ireneus, How Jesus' Incarnation Honors Creation, the Human Body, and the Human Story. Mako, thank you for coming again to our show. This is, I think, the third time we've had you on, and it's always a pleasure.
It is. Thank you so much, SJ, for having me once again. I'm really delighted.
Could you talk for a bit, since so many of your courses are taught through the lens of restorative justice versus retributive justice? Could you talk a little bit about the difference between the two and how that affects how we look at things like social justice?
Absolutely. So I'll first talk about our kind of modern criminal justice discussion on that, and then biblical studies and what points of overlap there are. So in the modern criminal justice discussion, we've been concerned about things like mass incarceration, or whether there's other diversionary programs, or even whether there's other ways to invest in people and spend more on education and less on prisons, for example. And restorative versus retributive justice is a helpful contrast. The main principle of restorative justice is to if I do something to harm you, then you can name and request of me what it is that I need to do in order to help you move forward or to heal from the harm. And if at all possible, if I can help undo the harm that I've done to you, then that's a factor. Or if not, maybe I can do community service, for example, and like educate people about the trying not to do the thing that I just did. And so those are restorative justice programs, and that has come from different places. It comes from the earliest Christian practice. Sometimes we have called it penitence, and it tends to have a bad rap, right, in Protestant circles, because we think of it as that's a Catholic thing. But actually, at least in its origins, it was trying to have an offender help undo the harm that he or she did to the victim. And yes, it was certainly abused, but in principle, it's something that is really important. Many conflict areas, like former conflict areas like South Africa or Rwanda, Uganda, have used it in truth and reconciliation commissions. The Scandinavian countries, or Germany and other countries, have used more restorative practices to try to bring down recidivism, which is very good at. Sweden was so successful at de-incarcerating people that they converted a prison into a condo complex. I mean, because they didn't have enough prisoners. Wouldn't that be a great problem to have? Retributive justice is the opposite principle of, if I do something to harm you, then you can do something to harm me. And so it is we tend to think of it as an eye for an eye, even though that's not actually what that phrase means in the Bible, in Exodus 21 and elsewhere. We tend to think of it as, some kind of proportional thing of principle of retribution then gets done to me. So it's offender-centric, versus in restorative justice, it is victim-centric. The victim gets more of a voice, can in fact lead in the process of naming what needs to happen, or what they're requesting would happen. So that's the basic idea in the realm of criminal justice. In the realm of biblical studies and theology, it gets very interesting. The first time I connected those dots was read a book by N.T. Wright, a New Testament scholar, historian, theologian, who made a comment in one of his early books that God in the Sinai covenant was enacting a restorative justice, not a retributive justice. Meaning he wasn't simply setting ancient Israel up to fail. There's the older paradigm of, God is a neutral, dispassionate judge. He has a law. We break the law. We deserve death, and he would give it to us out of retribution. But Jesus stepped in to the courtroom and took that retributive punishment, so we don't have to endure it. And that is the idea of retributive justice. And if that's the case, then what God was doing with ancient Israel was basically giving a test case or a case study of how willing and eager he is to just punish people for breaking his law. In a restorative justice understanding, it's that that wasn't actually what God was doing with ancient Israel. Yes, he was at times constraining people. Even at times, he had to take human life to protect Israel's vocation of ultimately giving birth to Jesus, who had a real humanity. But he was trying to call for their partnership in restoring the human nature that he intended from creation. And so a central idea there is Deuteronomy 10:16, circumcise your heart. And the idea there is, if Israel was able to internalize the commandments of God deeply enough, they would actually cut away a corruption of sin or a sin sickness that should never have been there. So the idea there is medical. God is a doctor. Israel is the only patient population that is cooperating with him on the planet, and so he gives them a pretty demanding health regimen, and it's tough. They're not able to fully do it, but they give it a good try. And so Paul in Romans 7 says, I did 9 commandments. It's the 10th one that always got me. And it indicated that there was something in me, the sinfulness that God never intended to be there. And so Jesus substituted himself in as a medical substitute to succeed where Israel failed. So he could become the cure and the antidote for our sin sickness and give himself to us and start healing us in the same way that he healed his own human nature during his life, death, and resurrection. So that's the basic contrast.
Well, thank you for that. That's a really helpful explanation. Now, last time you were on, last summer, you came on, you talked about plantation capitalism versus Jesus's Jubilee economy. How did colonial capitalism influence how Christianity developed in the United States, and how does it still affect how we live our lives today? That was so interesting. But there's another part to that. You offer a course called Along Repentance, Exploring Christian Mistakes About Race, Politics, and Justice in the United States. What does that mean, the phrase along repentance, and why is that significant?
Well, it's that this is not going to be an easy road. It was actually, I was inspired a little bit by, I think it was Along Obedience in the Same Direction by Eugene Peterson. I just thought, but it is a long repentance in this case. So just to connect it to, things that I think our audience would understand and appreciate, but also in the connecting it to restorative versus retributive justice. One of the most damaging things in Christian history in the Americas is the idea of the curse of Ham, or sometimes it's called the curse of Canaan, because they're conflated. But essentially, it was the belief that the reason why people have black skin. Some people have black skin, right? We have some people have more melanin in their skin, is because they were part of the curse on Ham, going all the way back to the story with Noah and his 3 sons. And it's frankly ridiculous. But the idea, the basic impulse there was God was retributively punishing all the descendants of Ham, and which included Africans. And so, if you believe that, then the next question is, well, then why don't we just pile on? Right? I mean, why don't we actually make it worse, or become the agents of that punishment? And this was the justification for slavery, segregation, trafficking, sexual abuse, and now over incarceration. The idea continues in embodied form. So it's especially seen in many southern states where the old plantations were actually just converted physically into prisons, and so the idea is really significant that Christian faith, number one, played this huge role in colonization and being destructive to people of African or Native American heritage, and others, but it cuts in different directions. And so, it's really important to recognize that it was a Catholic Pope who decreed the doctrine of discovery, which allowed European powers to take native lands, or that the Jesuits were the first to name race or people's physical appearance as a way to group people and actually give an estimate of intelligence, or that John Winthrop and Roger Williams had a debate about what is the role of Christian faith in the public square. John Winthrop was for theocracy. Roger Williams was for principled pluralism, and that was an early evidence of kind of a Christian nationalism versus a Christian democracy effort, and that this happened in the colonies is just U.S. history that tends to be forgotten. And my question is, so who was more responsible at using Scripture? How can we appreciate these debates today and even re-enter them and be re-energized? Because I think that it's especially white evangelicals who need to understand that, number one, Christians were not just complicit in the formation of things that were racially destructive, but they were causal. That doesn't mean we ourselves are in that same place. But I think if we understand that our tradition is, then we would look at our situation today with fresh eyes. So that's the purpose of the course, and we get at it through basic dialogues that are in blog posts that only take 5 to 10 minutes to read.
So in that first blog post, or maybe it's the second one, you contrast these two differing approaches to what is essentially Christian principles in the public sphere, applying the Bible to public life. And one you even call heretical, is exemplified by the Puritan governor of Massachusetts, Jonathan Winthrop, whom we have some familiarity with, best known to us as the author of the City Upon the Hill sermon, although I know that sometimes that's disputed whether you actually wrote that or not. And the second is a lesser-known figure, but equally important, Roger Williams, who was he the founder of Rhode Island Colony or just the leader? I don't recall.
Yeah, he was basically the founder of what is now Providence, the city of Providence. The colony of Rhode Island kind of formed over time from different mergers, but But yeah, he was actually kicked out by John Winthrop and some of the other Puritans in Boston, and that's part of a fascinating history during winter. I mean, he would have died because he was exiled from Boston and Massachusetts, but he had some friends in the Narragansett people who rescued him, helped him, and he bought land from them fairly. And he made a big deal of that as a Christian, because he protested and said, the Boston colony, and said, the King of England does not own these lands, and so he has no right to give it to us. If we want to settle here, we're going to have to buy land fairly from the native peoples. So he did.
And how does that contrast with what Winthrop was doing?
Well, Winthrop was part of the Massachusetts Bay Company, which was a for-profit corporation that was chartered in Old England, and so he and all of the settlers came as part of a deal to get a certain trade monopoly and privileges. They could take land, even though the King of England did not have the authority to grant it. But, disease had affected the Native American peoples around here, so that their population was really decimated. The Puritan settlers then had to send money back from Massachusetts to Old England as part of the for-profit corporation agreement, which is fascinating. So that is different. Roger Williams did not establish Providence on those grounds. He raised money and paid the Narragansett people fairly for the land to build a small colony, and then welcomed a whole bunch of other people that were exiled from Massachusetts. So they were called heretic. The Massachusetts called them heretics and witches in some cases, or they threw around these accusations. But Winthrop was very kind to Native Americans, welcomed them, and even was allied with them in many different ways. He tends to be looked at very fondly
Williams
by Native Americans today.
You mean Williams? You're talking about Williams, right? Not Winthrop?
Yes, I'm sorry. Roger Williams
right.
was.
Just want to clarify.
Yeah.
And you ask also kind of a historical what if we had followed Roger Williams' example instead of Winthrop's? What would our nation look like today? How would you answer that?
Oh my goodness. Well, it would have, I think, welcomed Native Americans as co-equal, because Roger Williams himself was a linguist. He enjoyed learning about Native American languages, cultures, and peoples. He wrote one of the, I think, the most popular books in English at the time, which was actually an encyclopedia about Native American life and cultures. So, and that was a bestseller back in Old England. So just the level of respect and curiosity would have been amazing. I think we would be better stewards of nature. We'd probably, some of the forest fires that have been recently hitting us because of climate change. We would know better how to steward the land. We would probably also do better with women's rights. We would have done much better. Early on in the life of the Providence plantation, there was a case called Joshua Varens versus Jane Varens, or versus Providence. Basically, there was a husband and wife, Joshua and Jane Varens, and she wanted to worship at the Baptist church that Roger Williams helped found, and he did not. I think he was an Anglican, and he believed it was his right as a husband to demand that she worship in his church. And she said, I think is my right as a person to worship where I please. And Providence was founded on the principle of freedom of religious expression. And that this is where we get the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, freedom of religious conscience and expression. And so the elders of the court of Providence ruled in Jane Varens's favor. And so just imagine that. the rights of women to worship as their conscience allows, right? Like that would have been established as early as, 1640s, 1650s, which would have probably led to women having the vote as citizens much, much earlier. So, those are just two aspects, I think, of the life of the Providence Plantation under the governorship or the influence, he wasn't always governor, of Roger Williams. He was also the first colonial abolitionist that we know of, so slavery would have been eliminated much, much earlier if that had been the rule, perhaps peaceably. The list goes on and on.
Mm. And you also say in this section, let me quote you here, there's no such thing as a Christian nation, only Christians in a nation. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yes. So biblically, 1 Peter, James, Hebrews, they all talk about being pilgrims and aliens in a foreign land, because Christians are, we have our citizenship in heaven, Paul says in Philippians 3, and Jesus had said, I have no place to lay my head. So the idea seems to be that all the followers of Jesus inherit the exilic diasporic experience of the Jewish people at the time of Jesus, and it's because Jesus claims the whole world and sends us out basically on mission in order to help people know him. So it's a very different mode of being. It doesn't mean that you never can own your own clothes or own your own house, but it means that we have to not conflate our Christian faith with either our nation or our ethnicity or race, because Jesus' claims are so much bigger than that. Mm. So that's the big difference between John Winthrop and Roger Williams. Winthrop actually invoked in the City on a Hill speech or sermon the idea that the Puritans were settling Massachusetts or North America with the understanding that they were making a new covenant, like the Sinai covenant, where they played the role of ancient Israel. They were, kind of crossing a wide body of water. They were coming to a new land that they didn't know. The land had inhabitants already that they now had to navigate. But they wanted to claim that God had given them the land. And so the poetry of the situation or the sociology of the situation is really attractive to making that comparison. But can we do that theologically? Right? Like, can we re-enter the story of the Bible at the point of Deuteronomy and Joshua? And I would argue no. And it's really, really sad, though, that the Puritans made war on Native Americans and consistently quoted Deuteronomy and Joshua. Why? Because they were warring with the people of the land. And so, a Christian nation, I think, is a contradiction in terms, versus Christians in a nation means that, yes, we love our neighbor. We try to reduce harm. We try to be thoughtful about how we practice our love for neighbor and reduce harm in our society. But we're trying to make room for people of other faiths. We're trying to make space just for our children if they walk away from the faith. Right? Like it just doesn't make sense to. I don't think we can do this to say, well, we commit to God to have our children be Christians. I mean, we could try our best, and we certainly do, but we can't guarantee that. And so we simply are not in the same place as the idea of impose or reenacting the Sinai covenant on our nation in order to somehow guarantee to God that we're going to do this and that for him.
Now, did that perspective on the Sinai covenant, did that develop as a sort of a Christian smokescreen for colonialism and slavery, or did they develop independently and just, kind of conflate at one point?
To my understanding, they were developed independently and then conflated. They converged. And so it was an innovation of John Calvin, who said, and his followers like Theodore Beza, who tutored the Puritans in England from Geneva. And so this idea also took hold in Scotland and other places. But the idea is, Calvin's idea was that you can break the Jewish law up into three parts, ceremonial, civil, and moral. And then you could say that Jesus fulfilled the ceremonial stuff, so that goes away. That we're supposed to reinstate the civil part, and that we're supposed to, live out the moral side of it. Whatever our situation. So that is different, and it is. I think it's self-contradictory. It's different from, let's say, Martin Luther. Martin Luther just said, no, the Jewish law is a unity, and it's superseded by the law of Christ. So for various reasons, and so that's where it's different. And then I think it's self-contradictory because you have things like, debt forgiveness, right? And the Jubilee principle of Leviticus 25. Is that ceremonial, civil, or moral? Well, really, it's all of the above, because because debt forgiveness in the Old Testament means people went back to their land of origin and they had their debts absolved, and it happened on the Day of Atonement. So that's in Leviticus 25. So. And it's connected to Sabbath ideas. So is that ceremonial, civil, or is it moral? Well, that's hard to say. And but the reformers had to make alliances with merchants because the Catholics owned all the land, and so that their tendency was to excuse, let's just say, lending at interest, even though Christians weren't supposed to do that, and then say that debts could never really be discharged or just waved away or forgiven. So that I think that gives evidence that it was self-contradictory and not just different. But the idea then is what leads the Puritans to say we have to reenact not just the moral laws that we're on the hook for, but the civil laws that we're supposed to inscribe in the government. And I just don't think that's true.
You talk about the idea that up until about the 1300s, capitalism starts to develop in Western Europe. The previous foundation for human identity was land,
right.
The land, and that capitalism basically began to turn land into a commodity, and so people's identity was no longer based on land, where they come from, what kind of land they live in, but basically skin color, and of course with white European skin color being the apex. Could you talk about that?
Yes. Yeah, so at one point, it made perfect sense to just say Jesus of Nazareth or Saul of Tarsus and Augustine of Hippo, because where you lived communicated a great deal about your identity and, sense of belonging, or who you belong to, what people group. With mass migration, with enslavement, and basically actually physical changes to the land of North America because of all the new farming, mining, plantation, cropping, the land actually changed and people moved. And so it became impossible basically to say, I'm from this place or that place as a way of, declaring your identity. So they, for different reasons, started to use skin color And that was a gradual process. But one example of that was in 1619 in Virginia. In May of that year, there was a strike by Polish workers against the ruling English elite. And the Polish workers, they were craftsmen. They said, we want rights here. Again, the Virginia Company was a for-profit company, and it was like their board of governors lived in the colony too. So when the Polish workers did that, and they said, we want voting rights and I think land ownership rights, the English elites said, okay, we got to give it to you. Now, in August of that year, 1619, that's when there was a ship that sailed into port, and that ship had over 20 enslaved African people. And the ruling English elite said, aha, a new source of free labor, right? And even cheaper than the Polish workers. And that, I think, is a really interesting thing to reflect on. Now, again, it wasn't instantaneous that they used skin color as a way to divide the labor force, but they began to, and you could look at the certain laws that the Virginia colony passed. You could see the formation. So whiteness was never a thing among Europeans, right? Like, no one thought of whiteness until the colonies in Virginia and elsewhere. And it was a way for the ruling English elite to get the Polish workers and other like working class, what we would call working class white people, to side with the elites against African Americans. And that political move continues to play out, where the working class white vote in U.S. democracy is like the big swing voter, right? Like that's the swing voting community. They are never treated the same as the oligarch class, the billionaires, dare I say, and yet they are tricked into believing that either they're superior or that certain rights that they have, like, in the colonial times, they were given the right to carry guns or employ black people, and black people could not carry guns or employ white people. There were mixed marriage laws that were on the books, and ministers were forbidden by law to perform mixed marriages in Virginia. It is fascinating. So you see this happening, especially, I believe it's 1705 was kind of the most sweeping of the colonial laws. And I think that's because Bacon's Rebellion had taken place, where enslaved blacks and poor working white people sided together. And the ruling English elite said, we're never going to allow that again. So they made every effort to politically divide the workforce by race. And boy, has that been powerful.
Even to this day, dividing people by race into white and black certainly continues to divide what we call lower classes of people economically, people
That's right.
lower economic run, who, if they were joined together, would create a really irresistible force, and there's such a threat it can't be tolerated by the economic elites.
That's right.
Very clear in your course. Really, really interesting. Now. Let me quote you from your courses. You say at one point, because race was inserted by Protestant Christians into church and society, race must be regarded as a Western Christian heretical construct, not just an ordinary social construct. It is a heretical category of belonging. It continues to do the work it was intended to do. Can you talk about that?
Yes. Well, there's a few ways that affects us. First of all, there was a legal construction of whiteness that continued all the way up until various Supreme Court cases in the 20th century. And so race is not just an attitude or a social construct. It is legally constructed, and it is it's in our Constitution. It is in Supreme Court cases. I think in 1922 and 1923 there were the Ozawa case and the Bhagat Thind case, where a Japanese person and an Indian person sued for citizenship because the 14th Amendment specifies African Americans and white people, but no other groups. And so, the argument was made that the Japanese person said, well, I'm not black, so I must be white. And the Supreme Court says, no, you're not white, because even though your skin is very fair, you're not white, because what we mean by white is what the common person means by white, which is Caucasian. And so then Bhagat Thind sued on that grounds and said, I'm Caucasian. He's a brown-skinned Indian man, but he's from the Caucasus region, right? And he threw in all kinds of information about language and how his language developed from, and anthropologists agree he is Caucasian. And the Supreme Court said, well, again, we are going by the popular definition of Caucasian and white, and that means you are not white. And so essentially the Supreme Court said white is whatever we say it is. And it's just fascinating. So, white has been more of a centered set rather than bounded set concept, and that's on purpose, because at times whiteness did not include Irish, Italian, German, Polish, Catholics, right? All those people during the 1800s were anathema to the Anglo-Saxons, right, from Britain and France. They're like, well, we're Protestant, they're Catholic. There was all kinds of reasons, and this is why there was the Know Nothing Party, there was the anti-immigrant laws. So, it's really amazing. But over time, that shifted, and Irish and Italian and other folks were included in whiteness, basically in order to build segregated housing. And so when I refer earlier to the Curse of Ham and the principle of retributive punishment, that was deployed. That's the basic idea. You could put it in positive terms, not so much positive use, but positive terms, which is the opposite of retribution is meritocracy, right? You have to show you earn your right to live here. So whether it's a physically gated community or a financially gated community, prove to me that you deserve to live in my neighborhood. That's the basic idea. And that took hold during the time of mass migration of African Americans from the South, because they were fleeing lynching. And they arrived in northern cities, and they were taken advantage of, and they were segregated. So that's a little bit of the ongoing relevance of race, and then you have FDR's legislation. First, you have I think in 1904, some real estate developers and agents conspired in California to spread racial covenanting, and so they actually put white person in the deed, so that it's if you bought this house, you can only sell to another white person. And then there were other zones where that wasn't true. Those same real estate developers and agents advised Roosevelt during the 30s on how to build the white American suburb and put that logic into the GI Bill, so that black Americans who served their country and loved their country during World War II came back and could not qualify for loans under the GI Bill, the same loans that their white counterparts were able to qualify from under, and they got housing. That's when we started to. We invented the 30-year mortgage loan and subsidized banks in order to protect them from any losses or defaults by homeowners. So the federal government initiated a huge transfer of wealth. It was a huge affirmative action program for white people, and that's how they built the white suburbs. So that just continues on. And, it may not be government policy now, but the private market and banks reinforce that.
You've just been touching on this topic, but, you go on in this series to talk about why Americans believe in what you call the illusion of meritocracy and how that illusion manifests itself in housing discrimination in schooling and policing and so forth. What is the illusion of meritocracy and what does it have to do with race?
Yes, well, the illusion of meritocracy is the notion that the American system is fair. And by fair, I mean that we only look at people's, deeds or things that they individually have done. In reality, it is not fair. For instance, we allow massive amounts of intergenerational wealth to be transferred. So, think about children born into privilege and children born into poverty. What's the difference? What have they done to deserve that? Nothing, either way. And so, but do we create a system where we try to level the playing field for children so that they can play on a level playing field? I mean, I don't like to always say that it's a competition with one another. Like, I really don't think we should just have that be the only lens. But to the extent that people want to invoke that, it is clearly not fair. Secondly, we've used government programs to institute, again, racially segregated housing. And that's a big deal because housing is the basis of property taxes. Property taxes funds schools. And so there are huge inequalities in schools that flow out of the housing system. And then we expect schools to be the way that people can get out of poverty. The data doesn't suggest that. All the data suggests that we may have exceptional people, and it's amazing that we do, but the things that they have to overcome is amazing because we expect a schooling that is unequal because it's built on unequal housing systems and unequal funding systems. We expect a school system to make up for all the injustice in the housing system, and that doesn't happen, and so it's not fair. It's also not fair that policing is very different based on where you live and what your zip code is, and police are many times instructed to over-police certain neighborhoods and under-police others. I mean, when we think about drug law enforcement, who gets, investigated and policed for drug use? Is it the white college students, right, on college campuses? Or is it the black kids that are hanging out on the corner? Well, I think we all know the answer to that. So once inequality is built into our housing system, all kinds of injustices percolate through the rest of our systems, and we talk about health and other things too, just because that's the groundwork.
We've been talking to Mako Nagasawa, who's director of the Anastasis Center. And could you talk a little bit about your website, the different courses you offer, and how do people sign up for these?
Absolutely. So the main website is anastasiscenter.org, but you could also find our Thinkific courses. We currently have 4. We're building more at anastasiscourses.thinkific.com. Those websites are linked, so you could go to either one. We have a broad range of courses. We do Bible studies. We have off-the-shelf Bible studies and evangelism tools, kind of like your bread and butter materials and tools that pastors and lay leaders can use in churches. And we really, really encourage that, and we come alongside churches who want to do that. And then courses like Along Repentance and others, which are kind of more in the Christian ethics category, where either it's a help to people who are wrestling with deconstruction and reconstruction, but they still are wondering, well, how far can we take that? We take church history quite seriously, and we don't think it would be good news if all of a sudden, we were to say something that no Christians before us were saying. I was educated at a Greek Orthodox seminary. We take church history very seriously there. And I think it's a gold mine to actually look back. That early church history is a gold mine. And so we want to connect people to what did earlier Christians say, think, what did they believe, and how did they act in order to confront some of these challenges that some of them we're confronting today.
That's great. We're going to have your website on our radio station page for our show, and people will be able to click on the link, we hope. Thank you so much for making time with us today, and for all this wonderful information. Reading through the course material, just your footnotes alone were just a gold mine of wonderful, wonderful quotations and facts and things that are just really, really rich in information, and very helpful information, particularly in this time that we're living in. So thank you again for being with us, and God bless you in your work.
Thank you, SJ, and thank you to your listeners as well.
Incidentally, Mako's course, entitled Along Repentance, Exploring Christian Mistakes About Race, Politics, and Justice in the United States, is being offered this spring, beginning on Saturdays, May 3rd through June 21st. So if you're interested, please sign up. Go to their website at anastasiscenter.com. Thank you for tuning in, everyone, and this is S.J. Munson signing out.